project indeed is, yeah, so I attribute this kind of being nervous. But yeah, I mean, this book that you mentioned, Peripheral Cells, so this I start with a sort of theoretical part with me conceptualizing what I meant by the peripheral self. So I start by saying this is a critical study, but not just the study. We are undeniably forced into this niche of studying someone. And I think any practice of decoloniality needs to subvert that. This is first and foremost the practice of conviviality, something that Ivan Illich talked about decades ago. And especially when we were talking about art organization, how different are we in, let's say, who are dealing with sociology, linguistics, in like academia, and versus an art organization. But I think these fields are very much intertwined, and there is a lot to learn from both. So yeah, my focus was when developing this concept on learning with and from, rather than learning about and studying a specific population. This was an exercise in epistemic humility in many ways, and I think this is what decolonial thinking kind of does to you as an academic. It's really hard to change when you're a certain age. So I also wanted to see what happens in these places of encounter in Bosnia, post-war Bosnia and Herzegovina, and post-socialist Bosnia and Herzegovina is a place of neo-colonial encounter of two different migrant populations. I'll speak about that later. Also, in addition to mapping and documenting something, I think that we, and when I say we, I kind of see myself as belonging or being part of the left front in the former Yugoslavia or Southeastern Europe. I think that we should move beyond mapping and documenting towards being committed to social change. I think this is very relevant for all of us. We're also identifying as activists and not just theorists, cultural theorists. And also, I'm not claiming to know anything. After writing this book, after studying, and I'll tell you what I studied, what I was engaged in, I think that I don't know anything. I know less about periphery than when I started this. And I would say that this doesn't mean ownership of some kind of knowledge that I now possess that I want to give to you, but rather I think that we're all onto something. And I think that, this epistemic humility is reflected precisely as being onto something. I don't claim to know anything really here. And also, it's always a problem when you are developing concepts from, let's say, from the ground, which is like what grounded theory does, instead of what a lot of scholars in our region have tried, just to paste Western concepts onto what we have here. And it just doesn't work like that. And I think I've learned it the hard way. So for me, it was all about testing and developing peripheral self. It was about testing, trying, probing, and it still continues. I mean, I still continue with these efforts. So the book and the concept basically started for me being engaged with three sort of fields. First is the field of BASOK that Ana Vilenica knows very well, because she also has spent some time in Bosnia when Banja Luka's social center, which was this independent platform that sought to promote social justice, feminism, memory politics, in other words, some critical agenda between activism and theory. She was also part of it. So it was BASOK. And I am someone, together with my friends, someone who was developing it from 2014 onwards. And then somebody who also became part of Justice for David movement, which I'm sure you've all heard about, and I can talk more about it later. And finally, was someone who involuntarily joined hundreds of thousands of Bosnians leaving primarily for Germany and Austria, when these sort of social protests and occupying public spaces really was proven not just effortless. I wouldn't say it's ever effortless, but when it sort of culminated in a lot of people just getting sick, in the lack of the investigative justice procedures regarding the death of David Dragičević and Jelena, and a lot of people simply leading for reasons of violence and torture and otherwise not being able to envisage, they're being kind of suffocated. And this is where I, as a critical discourse analyst, have moved on to affect and affect studies really and assemblages. So the inspiration to conceptualize peripheral selves came from placing the previously under-theorized post-colonial optics in the Balkans. There have been recent efforts to change that. And I also see Ana as someone from like 4 or 5 years ago, Ovidiu, Paulina, Philip, a couple of other scholars, we all took part in this dialoguing between the Post Conference in Belgrade in 2017, which was very formative for a lot of different initiatives that sprung out of this, I would say rather informal, but very, very interesting and kind of loaded conference to kind of combine post-socialist and post-colonial optics. And this is something that has been with me ever since. And even before that. But like this conference was an event that really kind of structured these things. In relation with the complex, this is something that I studied and where I kind of come from. For a long time, I studied the complex post-socialist and post-war condition, ranging from the office of the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina to ethnic nationalism to privatization. So this was something that kind of I had in my little suitcase in terms of previous papers and books and whatnot. And this condition in B&H in the European periphery after the bloodiest of wars, after World War II, of course, I'm talking about Bosnian War, and after 2 decades, more than 2 decades of contested peace, has been marked by what we call now the new post-Dayton order, political economic order, which froze the post-war status quo, which pretty much legitimized everything that's been won as a result of this unjust war that resulted in over 100,000 casualties and this division of country that we know today. We have 3 presidents, for those who don't know, 3 presidents, 2 entities, and still a very, very contested peace. And we've been living the Dayton Peace Agreement. This is not to say that there weren't processes challenging Dayton. Of course, there have been. And these processes, by and large, included the rise of new social movements seeking social justice and redistribution. I'm talking about the 2014 protests and plenums, at least declaratively, although that's contested in the studies needed on 2014, in my opinion, to kind of assess that better. Otherwise, we just, still kind of not documented enough, I would say, but also migration. And I see migration also as a social movement. In fact, there is a German word, Bewegung, which is basically movement, kretanje, pokret. So it can be a social movement, it can be a migration. So we can kind of see this Bewegung or this movement as protest as well as immigration. In addition, 2 migrant figures, and I'm glad that that our audience are the people, I'm really trying to test something here and to receive feedback. 2 migrant figures, or since 2018, been occupying this space of post-colonial encounter, socialist encounter, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina. The global Eastern and the global Southern one are emblematic of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a waiting room, a country of double transit, as it were. And another point where post-socialist and post-colonial entanglements are particularly visible. I think that this is really a good position geopolitically and otherwise to assess what is going here. Their traits are precaritization as a new global proletarianization, but also heavy securitization, and of course, humanitarianism. For as long, since the end of the war, we've had unaccounted for humanitarianism, and it still continues. A gendered and racial revalorization of peripheral bodies, feeling to the capitalists expansion, those who have already left, those who are preparing to leave, or have been stranded on the route. Both spatial and non-spatial intersectional axes of oppression complicate the center-periphery relations. These are not clear-cut, as we know. And I don't want to get into, we have some experts on on Wallerstein and peripheral development here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from them to be in this kind of polemic and dialogue. Of course, these are spatial and non-spatial relations. Some are structural, exploitative, and historical, while others, the so-called longue durée, including those of imperial past, colonial legacy, wars and capitalism. More specifically, we could say that in Bosnia, we were part of the Ottoman Empire, then we were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So in a way, Bosnia can actually, lay claims to being kind of viewed through the post-colonial lenses, even though it wasn't a traditional colony, in the sense of Africa or Asia. So basically, those are the dimensions in which peripheral selves are socially nested, and spatial dimensions are mostly geographical. I don't have to remind you that Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the poorest European country on its supposed path to the European Union, but it's not, entering the EU in any foreseeable future, which is also something for debate. So these differences in terms of, when they're understood, the central periphery classifications, when understood in spatial terms, there are marked differences in terms of regional and national development. For instance, I've noticed that a lot of my colleagues in Serbia and Croatia are using the term semi-periphery still. According to world system theorists, former Yugoslavia was indeed a semi-periphery, but now, and I've consulted literature on also, Wallersteinian kind of scholars like Danijela and Cleland, Bosnia is definitely classified as a periphery. In fact, it's not just been called a periphery, it's been called super periphery, periphery of the periphery. So I would say that Bosnia, because Serbia and Croatia are seen as also somewhat colonial in this context, that Bosnia is now not really a semi-periphery. It's much worse off in terms of GDP, in terms of what's going on than Serbia and Croatia. But peripheral borderlands, and this is another thing that Bosnia has become in the meantime. All these differences, talking about regional, national development, urban-rural divide, infrastructural discrepancies, cities, villages, whatever. In those peripheral selves, and this is a quote from Metsadra and Nielsen, are volatile, multiple, always shifting, mobile, constantly multiplying labor, and producing new subjectivities in the process of universal commodification of people. So my intention, while also reflecting on the materiality of these different movements that I was part of as a friend, as a direct participant, as a scholar, as a mother, and a migrant, was to incorporate. I had to kind of abandon discourse because I didn't think discourse was really enough to assess what was going on here. And as I said, I still don't know much, but I might be onto something. So my method was to incorporate, and this was like 2 years ago. We wanted to organize this happened online, of course. When I was in Gießen, together with some other scholars, we tried to organized this conference, a workshop called Decolonial Methods, Peripheral Selves, basically in which we wanted to see what different scholars coming from different peripheries kind of developed in terms of their methodology, what was going on, were they also parts of different social movements, activists, like when you're talking about radical housing, like it's important that it's somebody who's been part of those struggles, and it somehow gives you a legitimacy, a credibility, whatever, not just to be somebody, an outsider who's going to talk about it and then leave for something else, whatever is new on the agenda. So this whole corporeal, somatized, like if you've been in the rain, out in the cold with the with Justice for David, or with white armbands, or with, whatever, that somehow in me as a person, as an activist, produced something somatized, something effective, something bodily that I didn't think that just studying those discourses was ever going to reveal, So I kind of became aware of that sometimes larger structures play a role, like in the sense of the researcher researched, because of course, it's really hard when you're trained in a certain tradition to leave your academic hat just like that. I mean, it's necessary, but it's hard. So I looked at peripheral selves, including myself, of course, who was a privileged white middle class professor, you know, with all the privileges that I had, as being part of assemblages. And this is assemblages is a term that I, of course, use from Deleuze and Guattari. And within materially embedded and embodied, you know, so it's like, you know, we're always already there. And of course, we should be aware of our own class position. We should discuss it. But it doesn't mean that, you know, different social classes cannot strive for, you know, something that they want to create some new future, some new socialism, some new life, whatever. And also, I was very aware of the historically conditioned politics of location, something that I take from Adrian Rich. So I think that the specific location which I inhabit, the one of post-war, post-socialist Bosnia, kind of provides me with at least some sort of frame through which I can understand what's going on. Transitioning from a position of an activist researcher and somebody actively involved in opposing nationalism, which I, of course, have for years, patriarchy, privatization, socially owned property, to become a body under research, to become aware, to kind of, you know, to put yourself out there. I also, I mean, I have to mention it. This is not, you know, for anyone to feel pity or anything, but I think it's important to mention that certain chemistry in my body changed, that I suffered illness and inexplicably, and became also temporary migrant. So, you know, I developed this autoimmune disease. This was a consequence of different things, of different kinds of problems, struggles, tortures, whatever. And a lot of my other, I've heard this often from my Offenbach research partners, that they didn't want to stay in Bosnia because they didn't want to fall ill. And I find this very emblematic of what's going on in this world, right? So yeah, so the relational, you know, what's important with peripheral selves is this relational character. You know, it's this relational character of those who worked, gave birth, looked for jobs, housing, and otherwise inhabited the periphery. And it's crucial in when speaking about the activism as primarily libidinal labor. And then the production of desire, kind of start wanting certain things. You know, why are you out there in the cold? Like, you know, you want something. And this is Anne Boyer comes to mind. She's a poet. When she, in a handbook of disappointed faith, says, you know, this is like what shouting from a place means. And this is just a cold square. But for her, this is the entire universe from which she sees she's the subject. You know, she can speak, she can be part of some struggle. In talking about peripheral bodies, it's something that of course, is still cooking, that I developed like some 2-3 years ago. I wanted also to touch upon the notion of embodied justice and associated labor. My fellow Yugoslavs, ex-Yugoslavs will know this under the term of udruženi rad. This is a concept from Kardelj. And I think this is a very important notion when you are seeing that all this activist work of 10, 15 years has come to nothing, instead of uniting, associating this labor in terms of something like udruženi rad was supposed to do, so that we don't see depleted, sick bodies in its wake. And a lot of my friends and activists who have given their best years fighting with the police, fighting for some sort of justice, and now leaving for Germany to become Pflege worker, you know, to become medical nurses, you know. So in talking about peripheral bodies, embodied justice, and associated labor, I talked about love as practice of solidarity. Situating knowledge is an old concept from Donna Haraway from 1988, on the activist, academic, protester, migrant life seeking to create a basis of solidarity among similar and power differentiated communities. How much time do I have? Can I go on for like 5 or?
2 more minutes maximum.
2 more minutes. Okay. So basically, the context. Okay, so I'm just going to, you know, try to wrap it up. There's, of course, a lot more. The contextual embeddedness, assemblages and contingencies of peripheral selves operating as plateaus in specific interconnected, sort of kind of rhizomatic relationships in which the research assemblages arose via the causal force of desire through association and connection with constituting elements. In assessing all this is something I take from Deleuze and Guattari. my approach was via feminist optic, first and foremost, a Marxist commitment, a body-centered and eclectic epistemological approach. I know that some Marxists are hating that I'm so eclectic, and some feminists are maybe thinking, and of course I used in chapter 3 of my I tried to connect the post-socialist and the socialist with post-colonial and decolonial, insisting that there was, even though Yugoslav socialism was by no means decolonial, that there were anti-colonial elements. And I take this from the writings of Gary Wilder via M. Césaire, who talks about the so-called freedom time. This kind of also sense that there was some freedom to be achieved. And this is something that anti-colonialism of Yugoslav socialism primarily reflected in the Women's Anti-Fascist Fronts, Proletarian Brigades, and the NAM carried. And that we shouldn't just dispense with this legacy, but use it for future struggles. So this was important to me. And I think that one's method was always and has always been about one's politics and social change within specific historical, economic, racialized, gendered, and social infrastructures of oppression, injustice, and peripheralization. Of course, I could go on more, a lot more, and I will in the discussion part. But so far, thank you very much for allowing me this time to elaborate on the peripheral self.
Sorry, now I'm muting myself. Thank you, Danijela, so much for this. We will continue the discussion after we hear all the presentations. So, Jelena, the floor is yours. You can continue with presenting the lexicon entries.
I don't know if you can see what I'm showing.
Yes, yes.
Right. Okay, so thank you, Anna, and for calling, and everybody for being here. I just, you asked me to write about something that I wrote on my blog, and that's the notion of drunken whites. And I wasn't sure really how to put it, because it's like, it's my idea, so I could not really find any literature to put it like in some academic way. It's kind of difficult, but okay, so I will try. So my idea came as an experience. I think it was something that I noticed on the conferences, and initially the idea was to speak about epistemical issues, and actually about the involvement of white people, which I call people who are, well, white, but in European context, I would say, because Roma identity is usually seen it's like Roma are seen as European blacks, and Oriental other, at least. So for me, that was like my notion of Europe as white would be as Europe as non-Roma. So that's something that, from my perspective, when I speak about drunken whites, I actually want to speak about non-Roma, which in Roma theory, usually people would say gađe. So drunken whites would be people who are white and who have actually certain kind of behavior, which I noticed on conferences, but in this context, I will actually try to stick to the kafana place. That's something that I found connections, but I cannot really develop here in both directions, so I would just stick to one. Okay, so the idea is that, as I said, the Roma are in Europe usually seen as this European other, Oriental other, and as black people. And Silverman or Carol's wrote about this extensively, and others, but she wrote in the context of music. So I just took this dichotomies that she used here. So you will see that gypsies are usually put in opposition to something that that's like a host society, like Europe is a host society, Roma are coming from India. So, and she writes gypsies because, I don't know, she uses that term, I don't use it, I use Roma, but she writes like that. And then the usual dichotomies, like that they're wild, marginal, disorderly, lawless, violent, untrustworthy, emotional. These are some kind of like dichotomies that you will find in general in culture, in art, all kinds of imaginary discourses, I would say, like that they're actually dealing with something that's imaginary. In that part, I would say that my notion would also imply something that's beyond this imaginary discourse, and which is coming from something that would be not imaginary, and I call it real, but like I know that this dichotomy is like a problematic, but anyway, I put it there. And it reflects on something, on the real Roma people's lives. So that's what I wanted to say. So I wanted to speak about dehumanization in people's lives and violence and suffering. I would say that these two elements are really important for this notion of drunken whites, because people drunk, I mean that like people are drunk on their whiteness. So that would be the idea. So in the concept of whiteness, you would have this kind of imaginary discourses about white and black, Roma and non-Roma. And you will have this reality about Roma lives, which are actually, how to say, I wanted to say that this suffering is something that's essential for the notion of drunken whites, that people actually, in the context of, now I will speak about kafana and about musical industry, actually employment, that in this context, people, actually white people, Gajo people, have to incorporate suffering from Roma people's lives and their imaginary discourses to get drunk, basically, on for this whiteness to function, to be a functional concept, and to work actually, so that they that it's like a performative or something. But in general, it would the notion would actually be that in kafana, so basically kafana is a space of marginality and something opposed to, you know, reason, enlightenment, and all these things. There are actually different kinds of violence that happens, and sexism, racism, and I would imply also Nazism. So that's something, I mean, Nazi legacy, I would add to this. And basically, Anna Hoffman wrote about position of women in kafana, like kafana workers. And she extensively wrote about this and how women actually have to perform their gender identities and sexuality, and how they are actually harassed. And there are a lot of course, art movies, about movies about life in kafana and about harassment. So she lists all movies like in one of her articles. So that would be in my paper. But it's interesting because art actually represents something that happens, and that's like a part of, it makes like a part of, it resembles like reality, of course, and informs it. But she speaks Anna speaks about women, but she doesn't really addresses race, ethnicity, or position of Roma. I mean, she mentions that singers in kafana were usually they're like Roma musicians, and that musicians in general are exposed to violence. But and mentions that there are Roma, of course, Roma singers, but she doesn't really extensively write about it. It's not like an analytical category in her work. So for me, that's interesting, because like in any way, when I speak with leftist and feminist and post-colonial thinkers, this race strangely does not apply to Roma. So it applies usually to non-Roma. So for me, that's something that's like irritating a bit. And of course, now I had to invent this kind of concepts because nobody deals with Roma. But one of the reasons I wanted to speak about the kafana is because my grandfather, actually, he was a survivor of concentration camp. And he worked on different kinds of things. Among other things, he was a musician. And he's Roma, of course. And then we were just, we had this in our family, this story that he was actually hanged on a tree to play violin. And he didn't ever speak about this. He didn't speak about, his experiences in the concentration camp or in his, in kafana. But we overheard it like from our grandmother and stuff. And I thought it's like a unique experience. But when I started to, read about kafana and employment and like conditions in kafana, it turns out that different people, different musicians, very famous ones, actually said that they had to play hanged on a tree. So they were actually forced to do that. And Shaban Bayramović, for example, said that he actually had to do that. Some other singers, so I don't know if people know, but like Snežana Jovanović-Šikica, she's one Roma singer also. She said it in a way that was like a very accepting. She said like, but that's part of our job. We do it because, we have to do it. And so for me, that was interesting. And I tried to research this notion, but I could not really find it. So that was something that I found like a very small reference to this tradition of bet singing. And that's when you like hang a person to sing like upside down on a tree. And there is a movie about it, like you can, Sabirni Center, so it's the meeting point. And you can see this like a very nice scenery, which explains everything I think about this idea. There is like a celebration, and it's a wedding, and the person, like a boss, like a white person, Gaje, he holds a gun, and there are Roma people on the tree, and he's asking them to sing, and that's interesting, like in a sense that I could not find anybody writing about this or just, I don't know. So for me, that was like interesting to see. And in this, other musicians also reported certain kind of experiences which were involving violence, like Roma musicians. And these are, for example, Shaban was forced to sing and walk for 10 kilometers on some wedding. I don't know, I mean, there were like stories about how Van de Poort actually had his article about people coming to kafana with guns and pointing it to a Roma singer and telling him not to miss any lines and stuff like that. So there are different kinds of harassments. And it's for me, it was interesting this because I found some kind of analogy with the Nazi history, actually. So that's something that I was I didn't know about it. So that was something new for me. And that music can be actually used as an instrument of terror. So when Nazi camps actually were formed, they had this kind of like singing on command and playing on command and in different ways, trying to, of course, strength through joy. That was like this for their military. That was something to to boost the morale of soldiers. And of course, like Nazis really did try their best to deal with propaganda and everything. So they took art very seriously. And it was like, it was used in concentration camps and also for entertaining purposes. So that was like a kafana-like setting, right? And on the other hand, it was used actually as a tool of terror. And so the prisoners were forced to march in a rhythm. They had to, sing songs which they didn't really, which were taboo for them for some reason, either because of the lyrics or I don't know, different kinds of ways. So they used music to humiliate them, and that was something that's that was part of like making people, torturing people, and making other prisoners sing, and they use like different kinds of ways to involve music in this practice. So there were, of course, gypsy orchestras, and in different camps. So there were. There was a preference for Roma musicians in these camps, and there is like historical evidence about this, that people were actually these musical slaves. So for me, that was like a very like striking analogy with kafana. And of course, this idea, like it's very difficult to speak about Nazism in Europe. And for me, this practice actually, I mean, it's transferred basically, like, because now today we in Roma live in Europe in a very, very like bad situation. So basically all systemic violence is there, and it's simply like 70% of Roma live in Roma settlements, and 67% of them doesn't have even sewage and stuff like that. So education is very bad. Life expectancy is just, people live 12 years shorter. But usually, I mean, if they're musicians, I mean, I found like that this is even less. So this is something that for me was important, because it affects employment. So it's basically people who end up in kafana, end up come from this kind of population which doesn't have much options. And this is what, they're under duress in this kind of situations, that they are funneled to go to music because of the stereotypes about gypsy soul, and these people who are really passionate and whatever, they have this innate tendency to sing and dance. And that's something that's actually included in their job, and that's something that's kind of included in performance, which is expected by people who go to kafana. So this suffering is something that brings reality to the notion, to this ideas, imaginary ideas about themselves, who they are, who the other is. And Van der Poort explained this very in detail, so I don't want to go into this, but basically, usually people he considers that white people, like Kaja people, go to kafana not to be, to know Roma culture or Roma soul or Roma lives, but to reflect their own ideas about otherness. And for this actually to work, they need to have this like a tortured soul, which is anyway happy, but it's a tortured soul. And the suffering is actually involved. And usually people will say that Gaja people are racist because they are ignorant. But in this concept, like of drunken whites, I assume that they're not ignorant. They know enough. They know that Roma people suffer, but that's necessary and expected and included in a good performance in kafana. So that's something that's kind of, that would be like part of this like European Gaja supremacy idea, which I came up with also. I don't know, maybe it's like too much, but yeah. So yeah, that would be basically the notion of drunken whites. So in the context of kafana. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jelena, for this. You developed this in a very, I would say, fruitful way for discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to talking about that later. Ivana, are you back? Are you with us? Ivana, we can't hear you. You're muted. Ivana had some technical problems in this previous hour, so I don't know if this is sorted, but we can see your screen, but we can't hear you, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, can you turn on your camera as well, please?
Yeah.
If that works. Okay.
Works. Yeah,
so
it works.
You're on your phone now. Okay.
Yes. My last resort.
Okay. So
but can you thank you. Can you see the picture?
Yes, we can see the slide. Everything's perfect.
The slide, yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Ana for inviting me to take part in this important event. And I'm happy that Ana and I started working together on a number of issues in relation to different strands of feminism in Serbia and their relationship to race and whiteness, or actually the lack of any relationship to those. And yes, the topic, the subject of solidarity seems such an important concept in the history of feminism in general. And I thought that it would be a good idea to view it from or at least make an attempt to view it from a decolonial perspective and see what kind of what's hidden beneath this almost sacrosanct term when it comes to the practices of feminist practices in and activism in Serbia. And it was very, I tried to look for etymology of the term, and then a number of interesting concepts were brought in relationship with what we know as, in English language, as the term solidarity. And for me, it was interesting that one of them went back to the term solidus, which is a Latin name for coin. And that was actually official currency later on throughout 10 centuries in Byzantine Empire. So maybe this sort of association between political power and hegemony, that when we think about money or financial means or who has them, well, in terms of being preserved as cultural memory, I'm almost seriously entertaining the thought of relating or explaining some abusive practices in relation to solidarity in feminist circles in Serbia to the, you know, idea of mint coins and currency and money and power, which were kind of translated into Serbian social and political real during the Middle Ages, of course, and when Serbia was either at war or trying to compete with the Byzantine Empire, or you know, or saw itself ceding its territories to the Byzantine Empire. But okay, that seems a long shot. And what was interesting and very inspiring in terms of thinking about the ways to approach the concept and practice of solidarity, and devise some sort of very radical critique of it, was Jelena Savić's text. I would say it's a seminal text because it's caused a lot of reactions over the years, and it was published in 2017 in relation to women's anti-fascist march, which was organized as one of the marches which reflected global feminist or women's opposition to the president's, to Donald Trump's becoming the president of the United States of America. And that text is, as I said, it caused a lot of commotion in feminist circles. And it's sometimes very hard to kind of try and reproduce them in academic writing or refer to those debates. And debate is actually a euphemism. It's often been termed in very offensive language. I mean, because they happen on Twitter accounts or some mailing lists or on profiles of friends on Facebook, so it's hard to kind of make them public and introduce them as source in academic writing, which is what we are trying to do in this text on the politics of solidarity. But interestingly, Jelena termed, well, actually, she viewed solidarity in that paper as a performance, and that is very interesting for what we are trying to do in our bigger text that we are hoping we will publish soon in a journal. But in that text, Jelena refers to the solidarity show held in the US, which resembled a fashion industry and a celebrity event more than what has traditionally come to stand for a women's march, which of course is a public act of women's marching to protest certain politics. And as I said, this was the case with Donald Trump coming into presidency in the United States of America. And so we are trying to take the critique of solidarity a bit further and view it in that sense. The title of my presentation might be a bit misleading because I actually talk about performativity of solidarity, and I'm trying to view it as not primarily as a community building or a tool for political organizing in Serbian feminist circles, but foremost as a cultural practice monopolized, hence abused, to maintain power relations of inequality within those circles. Specifically, I approach solidarity as a performative or an iterative practice of a set of cultural norms which regulate the discursive production of an exemplary feminist activist, at least in context of Serbia. And solidarity as a cultural concept enables us to study its discursive formation in genealogical and historiographic terms, which proves to be particularly productive in a space marked as Europe's geopolitical periphery, if not its other. And it is interesting to note that going back to the example of anti-Donald Trump marches or anti-fascist marches in 2017, that they were called, well, anti-fascist and not anti-racist. That is also another important issue in relation to the politics of solidarity in Serbia, because there were many throughout the 1990s and almost until present, various feminist and not only feminist, non-governmental organizations and groups in Serbia, such as, for instance, Women in Black, but not only them, others as well, have organized numerous anti-fascist marches or protests, and anti-fascism seems to be a well-established tradition in a post-Yugoslav Serbian civil society movement space, so to speak. And on the other hand, it's well, it's nothing new, but again, the attention of the world during Donald Trump's presidency of the United States of America was drawn to his racist politics and policies, and there was, of course, the movement Black Bodies Matter. And it's important to remember when we try to formulate a critique of the concept of solidarity and its how to say possible entanglement with ideologies that are repressive or contrary to freedom, it's just not radical enough to refer to fascism, because as David Theo Goldberg said, being a committed anti-fascist doesn't really, or doesn't necessarily mean that one addresses issues pertinent to reproduction of racism in the context where one lives. So, okay, what I would like to kind of point to in this presentation is the double tradition of the solidarity politics in Serbia, that in contemporary Serbia, that enable the reproduction of what Jelena and I and Ana and I, of course, in our writings, and Jelena in our, well, I happen to know her in person, so we'll also discuss these issues. And of course, her blog posts for more than a decade now have been more than instructive and have shown everyone what she thinks about the existence of whiteness and in feminist circles and practices in Serbia. So my research kind of resulted in this double tradition behind the contemporary practice of the contemporary white feminist politics in Serbia, for which the administration of Solidarity is actually instrumental. So one of it is tradition, Solidarity, of course, being historically related to leftist movements in Western Europe, and of course it in socialist Serbia it had well, it was kind of very the solidarity as concept, and also as one of ideological landmarks was popular and well known to all citizens, and I mean, all those nationalities that formed former Yugoslavia. And so there is this tradition of solidarity coming through the socialist historical channel, so to speak. And then there is this other channel where solidarity was kind of used as a patronizing and a tool by Western and foremost US-based feminists who, in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, organized a network, East-West network, where they wanted to kind of through practice to form a transnational sisterhood. Well, in the aftermath of the fall of socialism. So in 1991, there was a conference organized in Dubrovnik in, I think, June 1991, and that was, and that's when the network was formally established. And that's where solidarity and understanding Western, or especially a well-educated, middle-class, white Western understanding and practice of solidarity was kind of imposed on the so-called sisters living behind the Iron Wall and having their well-established feminist traditions within the communist context as well, but kind of had to learn about how the concept of solidarity is viewed by Western feminists, and it also, in a way, had to do with comfortably kind of waiving some of your economic privileges to make events happen, or it's something sometimes being practiced, which kind of is dangerously close to the practice of charity as well. And yes, so when we see later on, I mean, there's a whole bunch of other events that were really important for the merging of the two concepts or the two traditions, so to say, in the present day practice of solidarity in Serbia as kind of wide cultural and political practice. And when we come to the socialist legacy, Miglena Todorova, a Bulgarian scholar, feminist, who I think works at University of Toronto in Canada, has designed this concept, which I find really useful, racial innocence. And Danijela Majstorović was talking about anti-colonialism of non-alignment movement in Yugoslavia and its sincere belief in that. But I think that there is something more going on here. And I don't refer to the NAM movement in particular here specifically, but there is this sense of being, being white in a way that does not actually kind of necessitates admitting the historical luggage of colonialism and, genocides and all the racism, all the atrocities that go with that for the people of, well, it seems through Todorov's writing, the Eastern Europe feminist spaces in general, but I would say in post-socialist Serbia in particular. So there is a sense of racial innocence, like kind of not accepting this legacy of whiteness, but in a way, and not being aware, sometimes it's really unwitting about the privilege that white skin does really actually in the majority of spaces and locations in this world carries with that. And on the other hand, there is also this relationship with Western Europe and the West, and and Danijela also spoke about it as being the periphery or semi-periphery, and in terms of critical race language, then being not quite white, or so that is one sort of legacy, and the other one it comes as kind of translation of this Western feminist hegemonic middle class solidarity and understanding of solidarity, which kind of comes actually becomes disseminated and adopted and adapted through meetings and encounters of transnational feminist networks. So transnationalism actually was influential in and instrumental in disseminating this type of white legacy behind the concept and practice of solidarity in post-socialist Serbia. So, well, when we take these two together, then it doesn't really, but it is frustrating to keep witnessing how Jelena Savić, who you all had the opportunity to hear today, and who is a very fruitful writer and, very well articulate about racism, about the issues in relation to racism, anti-Tsiganism, feminist elitism, whiteness in Serbia. She's being completely ignored by all sorts of practitioners and divas of feminism, either the academic ones or the activist ones. And her critique is never really taken into account because we don't see that anything is ever being changed, that practice, like when in the late 1990s, intersectionality finally was introduced into the activist circle, feminist activist circles in Serbia. It was kind of what it engendered later on was politics of tokenism, like again, which of course again, this sort of engaging Roma activists or two confirms the hegemonic position of the white diva who actually makes choices and decides who and on account of what will be included in certain projects and so on and so forth. Another important input in understanding why this kind of practice abuse of solidarity politics in Serbia has been taking place to actually keep certain figures in hegemonic positions, while others feel compelled, if they want to keep their privileges or whatever's allocated to them. So why it is maintained and has been maintained so successfully. So Bojan Bilić has recently published a book where it becomes very, and it's related to activism, LGBT activism in post-Yugoslav space, but in particularly in Serbia. And there is this very a good insight that I kind of adopted in my writing, and it's a theoretical vacuum. He talks about theoretical vacuum that was created in the isolation of the 1990s in Serbia when it was amidst, launching its well, in a way, colonizing wars in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Croatia and later on in Kosovo. So in this kind of situation of high impoverishment and doing politics and activism with and within authoritarian regimes, there is some of this authoritarianism that kind of becomes adopted by activists as well. So yes, that.
Thank you, Ivana, for this. We can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can, but we lost you for a moment. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Sorry if it was too long. Yeah, sorry for this technical problem.
It was important to be said, so thank you very much for taking time.
Thank you, Ana.
And now we will hear from Eszter, her thoughts about the independence that will contribute a little bit more to this discussion. And I think it has a flow from, this kind of performative solidarity into what actually independence means. And these two notions are in a way connected. So Eszter, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'll just put it on. Can you see it on full screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much, Ana, and for inviting me and for kuda.org for organizing this really great event. And so I proposed independence as a term and the concept. And within independence, I will look at independence in contemporary art organizational practices in the East of Europe and in particular Hungary. And I would just like to emphasize that I'm coming from practice. I'm coming from practice to academia. So I have this double feet or 2 feet. One is in curating and one is in academia. And so for me, decolonization, decoloniality, anti-racism, it's also a very practical question. So how, working with artists, presenting artworks to an audience, working with space, it's so many of the things I have to, solve and think about it also in the format of an exhibition. So I try to theorize from practice. And also, as Danijela mentioned, so I really try not to, stretch Anglophone discourse to fit, local practices, but the other way around. So I really try to theorize from practice. And so the concept of independence is, of course, not unique to Eastern Europe, and several people have engaged with it in an art context, and I refer to them later, but still I would like to propose this as a practice and perspective that is relevant, not only in the terms of the way it is rooted in practices in Eastern Europe, but also as a prism to which a comparative analysis can be made with art practices in the so-called global South, while of course marking the structural differences between them. And of course, I won't have time to go into details, but I would still like to place a few pointers in my presentation. And here already I would like to say that since Eastern Europe is heterogeneous with very local context, post-Soviet, post-Yugoslav, post-socialist, it's very difficult to speak of independent art practices in general in Eastern Europe as a whole. And I will focus on independent art practices mostly on Hungary, while arguing that the concept of independence is relevant post-Soviet, post-socialist, post-Yugoslav art context. And by the way, the same token, it's also very difficult to talk about the global South in general. And broadly speaking, by independence, I mean freedom from the state, free or even autonomous from certain parts of its institution and its ideological control. I argue that this relation to the state is what resonates through this Eastern European context. So not so much from the market, but it's the state. And in discussing the notion of independence, I will therefore focus on what I call state-independent art institutions and initiatives in contemporary times. So those bottom-up art institutions that are nonprofit, whose funding and operation is independent of the state-managed art infrastructure. And in particular, and as a case study, I will very briefly draw on my experience as a curatorial team member of Biennale Budapest, which started in 2015 as a grassroots state-independent contemporary art biennial. But today I would like to focus on two main points in relation to independence. So one, that it's impossible to be fully independent of the state, no matter what initiatives might state, that independence is an illusion. And this illusion is what actually gets negotiated in practice all the time. And second, that the ways a collective or a group creates a quasi-autonomous space for their own activities in an Eastern European context can be understood a lot better by comparing it with independent art practices in the global South rather than in the global North, but of course with the very important caveat of keeping in mind the structural and the contextual differences. For this, my argument is based less on applying a specific theory, but rather on explicating emerging practices as a result of so-called unsteady states. And I call unsteady states those locations which have seen a series of shifting state formations and regime changes, each of which attempted to build up a new kind of state following various political ideology. An unsteady state, which imposes fundamental changes time and again, can be considered to simultaneously limit and enable the emergence of state-independent art institutions. And these shifting circumstances have propelled artists and curators not in agreement with or censored or banned by the state cultural policies at a given time to creatively and proactively strategize, to create new institutional frameworks, to establish experimental art institutions from scratch. And many states in the global South can likewise be characterized as unsteady states, again, imposing fundamental changes time and again. And the commonality of the state-independent art institutions, I would say, is that they act in the lacunas of the art infrastructure, which is provided or not by the state. And so of Biennale Budapest is an example of such an institutional experiment. It is proactively responding to the current Hungarian right-wing government's centralization and ideologically led reorganization of the state-funded contemporary art institutions since 2010. And by proactivity, I mean that it builds and initiates rather than protest. And in this case, it's initiated the grassroots art biennale. I won't have time to speak to the images, but I just go quickly through them to some of the editions. And so in contrast to Of Biennale Budapest, and I will go, I will stop here. So in contrast to Of Biennale Budapest, state-independent art institutions in the context of Ghana, Tanzania, and Uganda have emerged in the last 2 decades, not as a form of resistance to the takeover of the state by the right wing, as it is the case in Hungary. On the contrary, they were born as a response to the withdrawal of state support. So in addition, in Africa at large, and I'm here referring to this study by fieldwork and study by Kobina Akuma Graham and Joseph Oduro Frimpong. So as they indicate in their study, another contributing factor in establishing independent spaces in the 2000s was a nascent global art market interest in contemporary African art. And the artist collaborative Nafasi Art Space in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania was established in 2008 as a way to answer the need to provide for and promote artists, a role which was previously filled by the state in the Nyerere era. And I have particularly chose the Nafasi Art Space and this particularly fieldwork for one specific reason. I haven't been to the Nafasi Art Space. I have been to art spaces in Nairobi and Accra, but the reason I have chosen Nafasi, it's somehow the reason why I know about this, because so I was able to access information about Nafasi Art Space and other case studies in Central and West Africa, because researchers carried out fieldwork at the state independent art institutions on the initiatives of the Prince Claus Fund, HIVOS, and the European Cultural Fund, and the outcomes of which were published in the volume Forces of Art, Perspectives from a Changing World. It was published in Amsterdam in 2020. And the reason, because it gives me another point of entry, which is the question of funding. So what kind of funding enabled this kind of field work, and actually Nafasi Art Spaces also receives funding from international foundations, and also it's a common characteristic of state independent art institutions. So precariousness and the question of sustainability is usually at the forefront of independent art initiatives. And in the absence of the state and its public funding, infrastructural support, so funding and collaborations for non-profit independent alternative initiatives most of the time come from international circuits. And several scholars have already pinpointed the problematics of the cultural fields and NGOization. An NGO, which is a legal form that grassroots initiatives have to take in order to receive mostly international funding, and what had all this bureaucratization that comes along with this. And how much time do I have? And then just again to underline the impossibility of independence, and more in the sense of economy, researcher and curator Kuba Schrader, by drawing on the concept of economic interdependency by Gibson Graham, coined the terms interdependent curating and interdependent curator to underline that the modus operandi of such sometimes wrongly conceived as independent curatorial projects are culturally, and this is a quote, culturally and economically dependent on the same apparatus that they want to contest, end of quote. And in the view of Schrader, interdependent curating is to establish an egalitarian and fair system of distributing resources and dividing labor. And another paradox that comes with state independency or state independent art initiatives, I would say it relates to the format and the form that they're working with. And here I would also like to consider the concept of self-instituting, which is stemming from philosopher Cornelius Castoriadis, and was picked up by many others, including social anthropologist Athena Athanasiou. And by self-instituting, in my view, I do not necessarily mean setting up institutions, but rather the performance of an institution by assuming and carry out parts of the responsibilities of an institution. The way in which collective initiatives makes room, so that, create structures, even if informal, for art, in spite of or without any existing infrastructure. So self-instituting art initiatives step up in the hiatus and initiate infrastructures in place of them. And Atina Athanasiou, again, we talked about performativity just now. So but here in a different sense. So using the notion of performative politics in her essay, Performing the Institution as if it were possible, while grounding the performative instituting in the Derridian impossibility, also covers the contradictions inherent in such endeavors. So Athanasiou underlined that since institutions are sources of both support and repression, one must work for and against institutionalization, so within, against institutions. And self-instituting initiatives in Eastern Europe are not without such paradoxes either. So in the case of Biennale Budapest, the most obvious contradiction is the format of the biennial itself. So even though it is produced on a very different grounds than traditional biennials, that in as much as it's grassroots, there is no stable funding or institution behind it, it reproduces and reconsolidates the biennial format as part of the event economy. But in a place like Hungary, where the state is not a funding stakeholder, like doing business as usual, so in this case, making a simple international biennial is the most radical and difficult achievement, as well as the only sustainable institutional experimentation. And so another common element of state-independent art institutions that endeavor to fill in the gaps in the art infrastructure unprovided or not provided by the state is that they often reiterate and range for more conventional formats, such as a biennale or a museum, but only in form. The real difference, So the real difference lies in the ways these art institutions are organized. And just in the context of West Africa, as curator Cabello Malezzi highlighted, that in the case of independent art initiatives, the fact that they operate akin to a white cube space or a museum is a strategic response to the gaps in the local West African art infrastructure. And and just as a closing, two closing thoughts. So in terms of the impossibility of going outside or becoming fully independent of the art infrastructure, a very basic example is that the very existence of state-independent art institution is guaranteed by the state, through tax numbers, registrations, and just as a legal entity in the state. And again, it's a big leap, but still I would like to hear mention again in terms of paradoxes and impossibility. And I would here like to refer to the work of Jelena Vesic, who worked a lot with the concept of independence, and as she very rightly pointed out, in terms of neo-avant-garde during the Cold War era, that the neo-avant-garde art initiatives were only independent of the art infrastructure, but still were dependent on the infrastructure provided by the state. So which meant that it was impossible to separate the official and the so-called official and unofficial spheres. So as Jelena put it, the independence in the East begins on the doorsteps of state-funded alternative institutions. So in students and youth cultural centers, in the amateur clubs of enthusiasts, or in galleries showing young artists and students of art academies. But of course it takes a lot more time to compare Cold War era and contemporary times. But one last closing thought that I would just like to emphasize, and what we as part of Biennale are currently learning, and it's a learning experience that we are part of Documenta 15, which is curated by, this year by the Indonesian art collective Ruang Grupa, and they initiated the concept and actually the practice of so-called Lumbung. I won't go into the details of Lumbung, but just I would like to mention one aspect of it, that Biennale was invited to become one of the Lumbung members with 13 other organizations such as to the question of funding in Palestine, Más Arte Más Acción in Colombia, or Brito Art Trust in Bangladesh. And all of these initiatives initiate infrastructure. So it's not, so it makes sense that we are part of it, and it's very exciting to learn from each other in terms of practice. But what we also have to keep in mind, this very structural differences that do exist between us. And I would just like to, you mentioned one example, mobility. And so the fact that, for instance, we have in Hungary have an EU passport, it's very radically different. And coming from Budapest to Kassel, it's radically different than coming from Ramallah to Kassel or Chaco to Kassel. So yeah, I mean, it's also something that we have to keep in mind while we are making these comparisons and analogies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eszter, and thank you all for this really amazing presentation. You gave us so much food for thought. I mean, we are way behind time, so it's 15 minutes to 6 o'clock. But I would still propose that we have this comfort break, like 5 minutes. Just, you know, I really need to go to the loo, have some water, like refresh, and come back. I suggest that we kind of extend this time a little bit if you still have like interest and, you know, time. For those who have to leave, they have to leave, and I completely understand that. But for those who would like to continue talking, we can stay a little bit longer because the next session begins at 7 o'clock. So we can stay maybe 20 minutes or half an hour longer if you.
Can we talk during this break? Or should we just all have it?
If you want, you can talk to this break. I really need to make a break.
Or
you can talk without moderator.
For those who like. Yeah, go ahead. I mean, I have tons of questions. Like, this is such a great forum.
Okay, I will bring the computer with me then. Okay, so my proposal for the Q&A session was you know, to have it in like 2 parts. The first part would be like a Q&A session among the participants, and because this is something that we are usually neglecting, and the people who present usually don't have a space to talk to each other, and this is something that my comrade and friend Veda Popovici proposed as a format that decided to accept. So now I would suggest to all of the participants to pose questions to each other and to start this discussion. And those who need like a minute of comfort break, they can go and come back quickly. So yeah, Danijela, would you like to start?
Sure. No, I mean, I have a question for Ivana Pražić, who raised some really, really relevant points, and I really look forward to discussing this live with you, Ivana, at some point. When you talk about, like, you be, of course, super critical of the feminist divas in Serbia, as you call them, you're critical of the concept of solidarity. Yes, with NAM, it's problematic. There's more work on NAM coming, but for instance, there is, I always keep referring to this book by Okić and Duganjic on the women's anti-fascist front. Would you not call that solidarity? Of course, all concepts that we deal with, that we still use, right, are products of specific history, genealogies, times, and spaces. So kind of my big question, and then I made a comment, it's always very difficult to differentiate between popular and populist. Sometimes we need, sometimes populism operates on the left, like, you know, how are you going to attract votes? You know, it's not just going to be 5 super radical critical people. So my question would be for you, and of course to others, towards what kind of solidarity should we, with this, what you just said in mind, revisit the old concepts? And I'm glad you and Eszter and Jelena, you mentioned how Jelena was ostracized from different feminist networks in Serbia, or not included, you know, which kind of throve on projects. I'm glad you brought the issues of angioization, something we've been struggling with in Bosnia for 10 years with no end in sight. So my kind of question would be towards what kind of practice then, if solidarity is not, or if do we need to revisit it? Do we need to get rid of it? You know, is this a claim towards a more inclusionary type of thing? Yeah, in terms of what Eszter was talking about, in terms of self-instituting, are you invoking a new type of self-instituting, old liberal feminisms that appeared in post-war spaces after 1995? I mean, yeah, I would just like some clarifications, because I'm really interested in practice that's happening on the ground, as opposed to us doing away with concepts that no longer serve us or that are problematic or have been, you know, otherwise corrupted.
Ivana, if you are back with us, that was a question for you, but I'm not sure that you could hear it, because I mean, there was some technical difficulties and they were trying to transfer her from the one role to another, and I don't know if she can hear us. But anyway,
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay! I'm sorry, I'm having technical problems on all fronts here.
Nice to have you back with us. Did you have a chance to hear Danijela's question?
Yes, I heard everything. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question, Danijela. Yes, that's a good actually set of questions and perspectives that you're putting into this. Like what do we do with this solidarity now? Do we? My point here would be that we don't need to just dispose of it, but what needs to happen is the abuse of solidarity as a catchword to kind of, you know, it just serves a purpose to kind of silence any kind of critique. It's this non-performativity of solidarity that really concerns me here, and that keeps happening. And Jelena is, I mean, unfortunately, I have to say, but a great case study for that. Like, whatever she's been talking about, and she's very well articulate, and she just goes to the point, and it's just being ignored. Tokenism is still taking place. There is no space in which critique and meaningful conversations and debate take place. And it all comes down to this performance happening on the street, where you need to show that you are in favor of solidarity and that you're practicing it. That means silencing any kind of dissent. And what I wrote is like, I think for first thing that needs to be done, I think there's nothing, and I'm following radical thinkers like Elizabeth Povinelli. You know, she's offering radical critique of liberalism, and Laura Solar and David Theo Goldberg. They're all critiques of empire and colonialism, or critical race thinkers. So one thing for me is to just stop avoiding feeling wrong about being wrong. Like, there's nothing wrong about feeling wrong, that you are, you know, like your privileges, which come with something like the effect of a contingent event of being born white or into the white and privileged family, just come, you know, at the expense of someone's being underprivileged, you know, being born into a non-privileged. And there's nothing wrong with feeling wrong, and that feeling wrong and a bit guilty and burden may introduce some sort of sense of feeling humble and stepping aside and letting other people talk, other women talk, and letting, you know, admitting that you don't know everything, just letting go of this privilege and authoritarianism and everything that goes with that. And just, you know, the way that when you say inclusion, like there's this definition of intersectionality and solidarity not being kind of practice of liberal politics of inclusion or integration. Like, okay, we now have a few different tokens for a few different minority groups in our organization, but we still, you know who is in charge and we can control them. It's more like being, you know, doing intersectionality in action. But of course, I mean, I wouldn't want to be the one to answer that question. I want Jelena to be the one to answer that question. You know, we have, you know, like in Serbia, there's this, you know, brilliant critical race thinker and critique of whiteness that, you know, is being totally silenced and you know, marginalized or just reduced to some kind of, you know, like marginal poetic Roma voice or something. No, I mean, she has ideas how to do that. I mean, so being humble, feeling wrong, not, you know, feeling wrong, feeling that you've unintentionally wrong someone, that whatever you do, it's not about what you personally are, but about, you know, inherited privilege. It's all written in Jelena's text, you know, like just having these generational privileges that you don't really think about against someone not having them. I mean, having the opposite, just the suffering, repression, violence, and so on and so forth. So admitting that and acting humbly, just stepping aside. You know, we have like 5 divas around, 5 academic and 5, you know, activist divas, and there are no other voices for generations. We're talking about 20 years now. You know, it's, so that would be my answer. I don't know if it's not concrete enough, but yeah, it's in effective turn that needs to be taken here.
Thank you, Ivana. Jelena, do you maybe have some questions? Yeah? Okay, just mute yourselves when you're not talking, please. Jelena, do you maybe have some questions for other participants in the panel?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it was interesting, this idea about activism as a place of desire. So that's something that's like something that you want. And I was thinking just, well, if it can be like in opposition to something that you need. So wanting and needing, for me, that seems to be like a little bit like, I don't know, I don't want to be an activist. You know, I don't know if people can relate to that, but like it's very difficult and it's very tiring, and I'm forced to be one. So it's just, I mean, of course there is a desire to have like another, you know, world or whatever, but just, yeah, so for me, maybe that's something that's like very interesting to think about, like what do you want, or is it like wanting, needing, desiring, I don't know. And the other thing was about this racial innocence, and I was thinking about how it relates to ignorance and fragility. So racial ignorance and racial innocence. I don't know, that's something that yeah, I don't know, maybe it's connected, but it's just because if for me it resembled to white fragility, but I'm not really sure how this might be connected. Yeah, I don't know, I guess that's maybe too enough. Yeah.
Thanks. Who would like to answer this too? Danijela?
Who was the question for? The first question, I think it was.
Yeah. I think I don't remember who was speaking about desire. Danijela, yes.
But I mean, I can only refer to my work in Basok. Of course, it started. I mean, I don't want to like go at lengths to kind of describe its genealogy, how it came about, and what we wanted to do there. Of course, it originated from a need to have a defactified space in Banja Luka, which prior to Basok didn't have such a space. It arose from the need. And I agree. But there was a feeling of, you know, camaraderie, and there was a feeling good. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that feeling wasn't happening on these occasions when we felt like we won something, when we felt like we were, you know, changing the rules of the game or in whatever way contributing to like having this. But there was also this feeling of like getting ill. A lot of the activists who were part of it and who are still part, first of all, a lot of interpersonal relationships were ruined in the process irretrievably. A lot of people got sick. People are 10 years older. You have to acknowledge that. So that was, you know, of course, it's libidinal. Like it's not just that we're always like, oh, we're these activists and we're like just doing these things. It's of course, you feel good. And I actually wanted to ask a question. Okay, this is like a group thing. You know, what would be good practices? Okay, with all this criticism, humbleness, absolutely agreed with Ivana. But like, okay, what would be the good? For instance, I mean, I'm asking this, of course, because I'm at struggle with the situation happening only, you know, 200 kilometers from Banja Luka. I mean, I visited the place. It's actually close to my village, Lipa, where there is a camp, a temporary reception camp for, you know, migrants from and refugees. Notably Kashmir. Oh, so what's happening there when we look at the practice level? There is saviorism, usually white saviorism. There is humanitarianism. There are Western people coming there on their 30 days visas to help and post stuff on Instagram. There is the state authorities of Bosnia and Herzegovina being complicit in the prolongation of the European border regime. There are some NGOs. There are the citizens of Bihać. I mean, it's when you look at the social actors involved around that space, the question that arises, and this is a racial issue too, because you have Bosnians and Herzegovinians who are leaving for Germany as white laboring bodies, able-bodied to serve the needs of German economy, you know, who I also like interviewed and like lived with. And then there are people who are like sans papier, who are completely cannot even apply for asylum, cannot do anything. You know, dispensable bodies. Okay, will they give them asylum? Will they not? Some get yellow cards, only a handful, not too many. So my question here is, what kind of practice, what kind of effective solidarity, what kind of concrete practice can there be that's meaningful? And I know some activists who are actually from Banja Luka, of course, I'm not going to name names, who started to avoid the state and Western saviorism and to kind of start living as neighbors and cleaning and collecting woods with, there is a place called Kashmir House in the region where there are people who don't want to be in the camp. But you know what? Solidarity is banned. You are not allowed to take anybody in your car. You're not allowed to take people in your home. So you're literally now seeing in Bosnia after 3 years, the consequences of this European border regime, like literally on people's skin. And yes, there is the issue of race is crucial here. When I wrote that in one paper in Germany, I think the person who was editing was like kind of warning me not to use the word race, because in Germany, race, when you mention race, you're like accusing somebody of being a fascist. So, I mean, there are a lot of, I mean, I'm still grappling, as Ivana said, I don't know, you know, but this is a forum to discuss these things. You know, this is a forum, this is a place where we need these things straightened, you know, and I am really about practice and not just, you know, pasting stuff from, let's import, you know, critical race theory from the United States. No, we have, you know, people of different race and we've been treating them badly, you know. And what are the good examples, again, to avoid this tokenism that Ivana is speaking of? How to avoid tokenism, how to be truly solidaristic and really show that in practice, in creating joint fronts of struggle. Sorry, I'm also very passionate about this. Thanks.
Thank you, Danijela. Jelena, would you be up for answering the question that was in what Danijela was saying?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult question. I don't think that these are like two separated issues, you know, like discussing theoretical concepts and, you know, what are obstacles and what's wrong with solidarity and everything. And like, what are solutions? I mean, it's kind of like we're not going to get that on this event for sure. But like, I don't know. I mean, for me, I just I realized that that this is something that that it's very difficult for me to come up with something that I can really name solidarity, and that's something that is my experience. And whenever I would try to talk about it, I would be really faced with, you know, like. I don't know. I mean, Ivana said it. I mean, that I don't want to repeat my, you know, what she said, and I don't really have an answer. I just realized that class issues are underlining very much this narrative about race, and this is something that needs to be connected, and that the racial issues, and it's like a discourse, like, because we really didn't have, like, you know, things like in USA context, but we did have discourses of whiteness, and that's something that Europe, like this colorblind legacy, needs to be, you know, unveiled in that sense. And people, you know, had these like things are in the institutional settings, and they are there is like institutional violence in that sense, which is not really like recognized as such. And I mean, as a discourse, I think it's present, and as systemic oppression in that sense. But I think class issues are much more prevalent, and that this is something that people would use racist discourses to, you know, advance their interest, like their financial, material, real interest. And I think it's, you know, this intersectional story. It's not really. That's one point of it. And as long as, like, you know, you don't have enough money to sustain your life, it's like really difficult to be an activist. And for me, that was like a lifelong lesson. You know, you pay very much. And so for me, like being middle class and having this opportunity to work in academia or something, that's a privilege. And for me, it's always like we're like we don't, like, we included, like we have privileges in that sense, and it's very difficult here people to just acknowledge their privileges. That's for the start. But of course, I think that Ivana is right in that sense, that it's just like, but it's not so easy to acknowledge them, because they mean, this acknowledgement means really material things. Like it means like giving up of your privileges, which is not, how to say, it's very, I don't know, nobody wants that. Like, you know, I don't think like activists want that. It's very, very few of them would be able to do that like that. But that was like my experience. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's nothing that I'm just I said it's going to like contribute to this, like how like good practices. I mean, it's painful, and people are like really, like, everybody's like self-interested. I cannot say that I'm not self-interested. For me, like, it's also the same. Like, I cannot really, you know, put myself in the same position as being Roma, as people who are living in, you know, with no jobs and like having no houses and stuff like that. So And in the Roma community, that's also a problem, you know, like these class issues that are completely unacknowledged. Yeah. But anyway, for me, that would be probably a crucial issue, because like if you don't have the money, then it's, I don't know, it's difficult to speak whatever. Like as long as I was dependent on white feminists in their white organizations, for me, it was very difficult to speak. And whenever I did, that meant certain kind of consequences. So, yeah. Yeah, anyway, sorry. It's just, I don't have solutions. That's just experience. That's basically it. I mean, that's, yeah.
That's very important to share. Thank you so much, Jelena. Eszter, do you have any questions for any other participants, or would you like to comment on any of these issues that were raised? I mean, issue of solidarity is also probably very important in your work. I mean, having independent spaces is also, I would say, like resource draining, more than like rewarding sometime. I don't know, like this was like my experience sometimes. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. Before I speak to that, I mean, I'm sorry if it's a self-centered questions, but I'm really super curious about this. So I mean, of course, you know, talking about art, and it's, you know, that the thing that I'm doing, it's a privileged position, and you know, I'm just continuing on the line of Jelena a little bit, but you know, coming from the art world, and you know, have this conception of you know, we're also doing you know, our fight and all this kind of stuff, but because it's such a specific and, you know, narrow discourse, I wonder, you know, do you actually understand what I'm saying, or if it's just you know, it's just a really insular discourse? I mean, I'm seriously, I'm asking, because like, do you understand? I mean, does it make sense to you what I'm saying, or is just so self-referential and stays within the you know, the art world discourse? Like I'm really, I mean, this is a question that, you know, I don't think it's get addressed that much, but I mean, it just being.
I wouldn't say so, because I mean, Danijela was also talking about this is all issues of infrastructure and what it means to have an infrastructure, or to produce infrastructure, or to you know, it's not only, I mean, I have like my issue with all of these things is that this kind of like non-dialectical look at the particular things, especially things like solidarity or independent infrastructure, you know. So this is, I think that this connected model, you know, the mode of existence of these things that we are looking at. And there is a tense, or commons, for instance. This is all great, you know, fantastic, solidarity, ooh, independent infrastructure, oh my God, we are so, you know, like different than the others, we are doing revolution. No, we are not, you know, like we are so, you know, like part of you know, like system, and reproducing things willingly or not, and we need to speak about these things, and you know, like not idealize them, you know. And I think this is especially important for East European experience, because there is something, I mean, it's complicated, but there is a kind of emancipatory experience in our past, some kind of, for some people. I mean, but this is something also that tends to be idealized, and this is also causing other problems. And you know, like for me, this is the whole issue is how to raise this issue like in very complex dialectical way, and how to constantly, you know, like learn, practice radical humility, and you know, like invent new models of being. So it's yeah, it's a constant how to say, pursue for doing that. So the things that you are talking, from my point of view, are also part of this experience.
If I may just add, Ana, to this, like also, again, I think that coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina and not from Serbia and Croatia gives me a different optics and a different view of these situations. In Bosnia, the scene, whatever the scene, the feminist scene, take any, is a lot less developed. You know, a lot of people have have either died, moved, whatever. So this scene is so fragmented and non-existent. And I would say that the same thing is with, with other sort of movements, and just living in this kind of apartheid-like society that we have installed through Dayton, whereby if you want to participate in the political life, you have to identify as the Serb, Croat, or Bosniak. We've had the famous Savić-Finci case, the case of a Roma person, a Jewish person, who complained to Strasbourg or whatever. Like, they're not politically recognized in our Dayton system. So we have this ingrained, it's in our law. I mean, can you just imagine how brutal that is? And of course, I'm all against tokenism. And of course, recognition of your privilege is the first step towards amending it. I do believe, truly, maybe naively, that solidarity of some front, maybe in the future, maybe we don't know the contours of it yet. I really thought, I've studied the archive of the Women's Anti-Fascist Front. There was the revolutionary potential was there. Of course, it was killed in 1953, the feminist tendencies, whatever. I don't want to get into it. Others have written more about it. But there must be some potential for power, even for power differentiated communities, to co-construct a basis of conviviality, and some potential for a life that it's going to be unbearable for all of us when they suffocate us with bad air, with and maybe it was for me a sensibility of recognizing I was not just I may have been privileged in some ways, but falling ill. I think that for me this disease really, and then even if I have the money, who's going to treat you? Our hospitals are dying rooms. Our healthcare system is devastated for everyone. That this, I think, sensitized me more than anything in terms of assessing and realizing, recognizing. I think that for that reason, when I realized, okay, we're all in this shit together, or we must be, otherwise, maybe there's some idealistic hope. Maybe I'm stupid, but if I didn't believe in that, I would just hold everything here. Like, it would be cynical of me to even speak about peripheral selves. To even introduce that, assess this through a failure of the justice system, immigration, and ailing political ailment of, social injustice and privatizations and whatever Basak was doing. So if there wasn't a concrete political practice to kind of substantiate these claims, I would be a liar and a cynic.
I would maybe just like to add a little bit more on the and maybe finish on the note of culture. We had all of this criticism of, like culturalization and so on, and it's great, but still, if you can see where we are having this discussion, it's in the space of culture. So kuda.org generously, they gave it this space so we can have all of this discussions. It has to do something with what in one conversation video was telling, that this conversation take part in the cultural space because it's so irrelevant that we can talk here and, there is some kind of space for this conversation that need to be raised, that need to be, happening. So, yeah, that's why I think that all of these things are interconnected, and that there is I chose all of you on purpose, so don't worry, you're not falling out of the picture. Yeah, would someone else like to add something, or do we have any questions from the audience? I see that there was a vivid discussion in the chat, but it was more of an exchange between members from the audience and participants, and I see that most of the questions were answered. But if someone wants to ask something else, there is still a moment from the audience. If we still have an audience, because it's 6:20 already, and I don't see on the screen if we have an audience. Maybe it's just us. If not, I would like to thank you all. I think this was a very incredible conversation, and I'm so happy that you said yes to this invitation, and I'm really much looking forward to continuing this discussion with you and working on a publication and creating more of this kind of events when we can meet and develop these things further. Yes, we are not going to solve the question of solidarity or independent, infrastructure in these conversations, but it is a space to kind of, at least in our hands, minds, and our practices, move things further. So thank you so much all, and see you in half an hour if there is any wish to continue with the 4 more incredible speakers that we will have in 7 o'clock. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
We can stop recording and just